Hey guys, welcome. It's always a challenge to decide if a synthesizer like the AX60 should be considered legendary. So tonight you got me vote and actually decide in the chat if this is a legendary synthesizer. So welcome. Tonight we're going to do some sound design with this awesome synthesizer from 85 or 86. All analog synthesizer. I know those sounds might not sound analog, but it is. And then we'll talk about some history, go through some fun facts and things. And then finally, we will run this synthesizer with the help of the chat through the legendary synthesizer test to determine if it deserves that legendary moniker. So welcome, everybody. This video has been flagged by YouTube for what? Could that possibly be? Why would that be? Too many plants, not enough ambiance. So guys, this is going to be a lot of fun. This synth, the AX60, is a very special synth. It kind of represents an underdog analog synth. Everybody knows about the Juno 106 and stuff like that, but this synth is kind of the cat's pajamas, in my opinion. So usually I start by playing some presets. This is one of the presets I liked. And let me get my meter up just to make sure I know what the levels are here. Should have had that going before. Oh well. So we're going to get into the S900, but essentially what I've learned, Dub, is that although this technically does have this sampler input here, which is a 13-pin cable, and it's a kind of a rare cable. It's expensive nowadays. I was able to get one and hook it up to my S900, and I was having so much trouble because it didn't seem to be working. I took it to my synth tech, and Ramiro at Severed Machines basically said, look, this doesn't seem like a feature that the S900 was actually set up to do. And another friend of mine, Jerome, in the chat, I don't know if Jerome's here right now, explained it to me that the way it works is, unfortunately, there's like no global way to use the S900 with the AX60. You actually have to do every single patch needs to be reset up. So anything you've done or anything you've sampled, you have to go through and manually do the voice group so it'll output to this, and it's kind of a nightmare. So I think the recommendation is if you want to use the sampler in on the AX60, you want to use an S612, the original sampler. I think later on they changed their mind about that. So, but anyways, tonight I actually want to start with just some sound design. And I'm just going to turn those echoes down a bit. I love echoes, but there's something like that, so it's not too much. And how's it going, everybody? Welcome, welcome. So we're starting with just a sawtooth wave. And what we could do is go to VCA gate. So that's what you would have like on a Juno or something where it's on and off. Or you have a separate envelope for the VCA and VCF. So let's go to the VCA and bring everything down except sustain. So it's the same thing as VCA gate, but let's add some attack. Just a little bit, and we'll bring some decay in. And bring the sustain just shy of all the way up. So we have more of a poly shape to that, right? Going to the filter, yes, that's right. It's a CEM3394. So that's the synth-on-a-chip. So what that means is it's a single VCO, not a DCO, right? So a voltage-controlled oscillator, which usually is associated with the higher price analog synths, a filter in a VCA all on one chip. And it was originally designed, we'll get into some history, but actually for an arcade chip, and then later repurposed for the 6-track. So we're already kind of getting a little of that brassy tone. I'll put key follow at about 50%. I mean, it's not the end of the world brass sound right there, right? Not so bad, right? So what do we need to make it more brassy? Well, we could use the LFO. It's on triangle mode. And we can route that to the VCO, right? And we'll just bring in, I'll put the speed at about 50. And you'll notice the speed is actually really intense, even at 50, right? Can go basically into audio rate. And I'm going to add some delay so it comes in later. Somewhere in that neighborhood. Sounds pretty good. Now let's add some of the filter. So let's bring that in. What we're going to do with the filter. So what's so great about this synth, it's one of the only affordable vintage synths you can buy that's essentially one knob per function. The only, little thing you have to deal with is selecting the VCF, VCA, or VCA gate envelopes over here. And same thing, you have where the LFO is going. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of that's like a compromise from something like a Prophet 600. So sustain all the way down, release all the way kind of somewhere. There we go. Let's add some attack. We don't need much, just a little spit. We're trying to achieve blip here. Just like that. And then just bring the sustain up because we can use some. I want more LFO depth now and less delay. So because it is essentially a sequential circuit 6-track under the hood, it kind of has that sequential sound. So even though people would say a synth like the Poly 6 is something of like a poor man's Prophet, there's a way in which the AX60 is even more so, where to my ear, it's got that sequential sound. What was it? The Unison. Adapt is talking about the Unison mode, so we could kick that on and just hear. All of a sudden, we're sort of more into like a Pink Floyd sort of lead sound. If we wanted to do that, right? Let's add some one thing without a Tontec modded AX60 is you have to move the slider kind of faster than you'd think for it to register. They basically tried to filter out dusty slider noise, and in so kind of did some weird decision making. So we just need some more release. You can really hear with the resonance up a bit that we need a little more release from the filter. You can set the pitch range to different notes, which is really nice. So check this out. like using a 7th, right? Because you'll always... Yeah, so really great. And then, of course, the most important part, and this is something that the 6-track doesn't have. I think it might have been the Max or Split 8, one of those sequential synths was the first to have a chorus. So let's turn the chorus on. I'll have to turn the volume down. I hope you're listening in stereo because it just got awesome. And you're very right that the resonance can go really overkill. So I mean, listen to this. If you want to get there, it can go insane. And that's the beautiful thing. So let's say we wanted to get this a little bit more Oberheimy now, right? Because something interesting about this filter is like listening to the resonance all the way down, you can hear... Turn the volume down a bit. And you can hear that as I increase resonance, you lose so much signal in bass. But you get this like incredible, more resonance than you'd ever think you'd need. And then kind of in this range, it's almost more like an EQ. I mean, it sounds so good, though. I know I'm a little hypocritical because I have a tendency to say that I don't love the sound of synths that lose a lot of bass on the filter. But this one, it's just one of those things. Certain synths sound great with it, certain ones don't. This one just has a really beautiful sounding filter. But... and I know my real scum. By the way, can I get some scum cheers in the chat for the real scum out there? I know the real scum know the trick to this synth is the VCO Mod slider. So this is how this sounds. And we get a completely different texture. Listen to the difference in the flutter there versus nothing, VCO Mod. I just love this. So what this is filter FM. It's routing the oscillator to the filter. And the more, as you add some resonance, we start to get into some crazy territory. With it all the way. It's pretty wild. It's definitely the closest thing I've ever heard to a sadomasochistic filter, but it's a Curtis 3394 filter if you're talking about the actual manufacturer. So we went from that sound and then just increasing. Some of these middle territory sounds are really great. For all sorts of, whether you want to go ambient with it or more into the darker territory, you know. What a completely different characteristic. Okay, so let's go kind of back to just like a neutral sound. So I'm going to turn I'll leave that all the way up. So I'm just basically clearing out the attack, decay, sustain, and then going back in here and clearing. We should be pretty close to... and turning the chorus back off. We have two different choruses. Let's talk about that for a second. So no chorus, chorus 1. Chorus 2 is very similar to chorus 1. So unlike on a Juno where it's a speed thing, I heard someone say that it was double the tempo, but I don't think that's exactly the case. It's sort of just like has a more complex shape, because you definitely still get that feeling of the chorus. And what's so great about this synth is that chorus is an MN3009 Bucket Brigade delay chip, which if you know your synths, that's the same chip in the Juno 660 and 106, the famous Roland chorus sound. So in a lot of ways, this is a sequential 6-track with hands-on control, unison, and chorus, with all things missing from the original. Actually, the 6-track might have been able to do unison, but the chorus and the hands-on controls for sure, and the ability to take the resonance much further than basically any other synth I've ever heard of. So anyways, chorus off. Let's talk about the oscillator section a little bit more. So first off, we could swap between that sampler I was talking about before. So if you have an S612, you can actually plug it in and use it. This is essentially the only way that I know of how to do an LA synthesis type thing with an analog synth, where you could do one VCO plus whatever sampler input you have. But in this case, what we can use is just noise. So... and if you've been listening to noise on this channel well enough, Brett, how's it going? You'll know that sound. Because you've heard it on such synths as the Moog Source. Memory Moog has this same thing. I believe that Chroma Polaris does too, and a few others. It's a digital noise. So what it actually is a sample of noise that loops. And now that I've said that, you'll be able to hear the heartbeat of it, and it will drive you crazy. It's a thing you could notice. So let's talk about what's going on with... so we could use the EG depth. I believe it's VCF EG to control the pitch here. So if we want to make a kick drum, we can move over to maybe more square wave and... so, that's how you could kind of get into that territory, but... any of that sort of techno sound. But what's more interesting is the different, we've got different waves. So let's just go through that real quick. So we got the sawtooth wave, which we heard. But we could do pulse width modulation on all 4 of the different oscillator types, which you usually can't do. Now, what I will say about the PWM, or I should say like saw width modulation on this synth, is it's kind of odd, and it's not as usable as on the Alpha Juno, the Chroma Polaris, and I presume the Oberheim OB8, which could do it also. Let me show you on the, if we go to the triangle wave here, triangle. Oh, it's nice that we still got that vibrato in there. It's giving Legend of Zelda 2 vibes. Love that type of a sound. But anyways, if we go into the pulse width now, we can hear what's kind of happening is it's borrowing something to do with the pulse width of the square wave and injecting it to the triangle wave signal. So it's not exactly pulse width modulation on the saw or triangle, it's something else. Which could still be useful, right? I mean, it's an interesting sound. You know, you could use this kind of like a rhythmic thing, right? But what I will say is that it doesn't exactly, you know, it's not quite as musically useful as I'd like it to be. The pulse wave, the square wave, is exactly as meaty as you'd like it to be. So if we do pulse width with this, you'll hear a cleaner type of a sound. And it's just so beautiful. It could go pretty slow. So without having more than one oscillator per voice, and it doesn't even have a sub oscillator like you might have on a Juno, it can sound really big and beefy, especially with the resonance all the way down. Your wish is my command. I can turn the effects off very easily for you. Adapt. If we wanted to turn this into like a Reese sort of sound, we could turn Unison on. And the chorus, right? We'll put it on chorus 2. And there's no portamento on the synth, so that's maybe a bit of a bummer, but... some resonance in there. I mean, it's crazy, right? It's pretty beefy what you can do. With the Unison on, we're already back into sort of like a pretty neighborhood, right? It's nice here. So let's Oberheim this out, right? Like, let's go more into that direction. It is a Curtis chip, so it's going to be in that neighborhood sonically. of the OB series as well. So let's add some depth. Everything's so good. So easy, I should say. And then decay. Yes, the Karmic. I think there's not that much here that you can't do with an OBX8. I don't know. Can you do filter FM on an OBX8? Good to see Adam, man. I haven't seen you for a while. How are you doing, my friend? So this is how we could do, you know, more of that like Tom Sawyer Rush thing. They are not going to for stupid money, depending on how you define stupid. I would say the right now the street price on one of these is about $1,150, which for a synth this cool I don't think is that much, but for some people it might be a lot considering it's just a 6 single voice oscillator synth. Yeah, through 0 FM is going to be a very different sound than what makes this synth powerful. So looking at the resonance, it just gets crazy so quick. But with VCO Mod, we get something very similar to that Oberheim sound, right? I don't know. I've always wondered if there's some filter FM on the SEMs or the OBX because it sounds like it is. I don't think there is. I think it's kind of like two different paths that can kind of sound similar. But when you hear that sound, it definitely, to my ears, reminds me of that sort of neighborhood, right? Once you push that, without VCO Mod, the resonance is crazy right now. Well, it's not that crazy. It's right on the edge. It's so interesting how it could have an almost LFO-like sound, the VCO Mod here. And then as soon as we, again, if we push the resonance a little further, it's insane, so watch your ears. Right? But using the VCO Mod, now we've tamed that. No, I just lied to you so hard. Takes us into this sci-fi sort of territory. Pretty we do have a high pass filter too, by the way. All of that from this sound. Right. So it's actually kind of interesting when you get into a mix. I usually like to lead a little bit with the VCO Mod. And dial it in this way. So now we have a very different kind of... You know, the thing about, I wouldn't say ignorance, right? Because so many people have shit on this synth. You know, Espen Croft lists it in his top 10 least favorite synths, right? Like the worst synths in his opinion. Because to a lot of people, it sounds cold. And I think even back in the 80s, when an analog synth was labeled cold, that was like the death knell, right? That was it for that synthesizer. But listening to this, I feel like the synth can go from really warm. I mean, it's so big and lush. Meaty fucking oscillators, you know. That's awesome, Rayon. you bring it in, we get these textures and characters that you can get from other synths. So like off the top of my head, the Prophet 600 can do this, Matrix 6 can do this, of course the Matrix 12 behind me can do this type of thing. But this is definitely the cheapest of them, generally speaking. It's a very gnarly synth. So it's like, here's the thing about it. If you want the lush thing, you could probably get there with like a Roland JX or something like that. And if you want the gnarly thing, like you got to be into the gnarly thing to be into this synth, because otherwise it's just, it gets unusable quick. But for me, that's a beautiful thing, you know. I think it sounds really cool and really kind of different. Change the octave and go. Handles the high end no problems. Let's go back to just the oscillator here and bring the octave back. Let's go pulse width down. Let's go check out saw and triangle. So it doesn't have a sub oscillator, but saw plus triangle is very fat. Immediately you could feel that mid-range, low mids come forward, you know, the 3-500 range. If you're listening, the bass coming off of that, it's pretty crazy. So now we're kind of getting that. Now, what's so cool, I do use pulse width mod on saw plus triangle. I don't like it on saw, I don't like it on triangle, but together, that pulse width modulation borrowing from the square wave that the synth is doing. Super Compooper, welcome to the chat with such a comment. Lonnie, how are you doing? So it actually sounds really good on this mode. It's like borrowing a little of that sound. And if you take it to the extremes, sort of gives you a helicopter sort of sound. It's so huge. So to me, with the chorus off, with the chorus on, sorry, we're really kind of getting into super saw. Add a little resonance to remove some of the low end. Bring in some effects, and all of a sudden, you know, we're sort of in that sort of neighborhood. Maybe some more resonance. And then back to VCO. Oh yeah, I do play Running Up the Hill a lot. What would it be? Octave, something like. The resonance is crazy, bringing the VCO mod. I mean, I would say this sounds pretty great. And for me, just takes you in different territories than you would normally go. Also handles noise really well. So as I've mixed some of that noise in, tepid and uninspiring. It's pretty powerful. So what I want to talk about now actually is a little bit of the history of the synth. So if you guys are familiar with the Legendary streams, this is how this goes, right? First off, let me get another scum cheers in the chat. You guys are phenomenal. I hope you guys find value in what we do here. YouTube is the most beautiful place. It's been so incredible to me. It can be tough, but I'm fucking loving it. So I hope you guys are too. Welcome if you're new here to the Scumsters. Cheers, guys. Okay, so I want to set the stage. It's 1986. Some of y'all remember 1986. I certainly don't. Movies in the theater. Top Gun, Crocodile Dundee, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, probably my favorite, maybe behind Wrath of Khan. Aliens, a lot of people's favorite Aliens movie. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. The Fly, the most incredible David Cronenberg flick. Blue Velvet, probably David Lynch's biggest movie ever. Labyrinth with David Bowie, and Highlander all came out in 1986, right? Wild year to be alive. Songs that were happening, what was popular musically. West End Girls by Pet Shop Boys, Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel, Papa Don't Preach by Madonna, Take My Breath Away by Berlin, of course off the Top Gun soundtrack, as well as Danger Zone, right? Higher Love, one of my personal favorites by Steve Winwood. So just like a really crazy time to be alive. Oh, I love that so much, 40 Thieves. Yeah, that was a fucking year, 86. So, but we're going to jump all the way back to 1929 to Imperial Japan. And Masakichi Akai and his son Saburo Akai, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, started the Akai Electric Company back in 1929, Japan. Next, we're going to jump ahead quite a bit, actually, to 1973. Kazuo Morioka, which I just want to stop. We all know like Kakahashi, Yamaha, Kawai. We know those names. But Morioka is actually the first person to make a synthesizer in Japan. So he beat out the Mini Korg in 1973 by releasing the Blue Comets. And he went on to found brands Hillwood, Pulsar, First Men, and Multivox. Some of you scum snobs out there will know those synthesizers. And so he actually invented the first synthesizer to hit the market in Japan, 1973. We'll come back to him. Jump forward 10 years. So we're skipping through the history, but we've done this history section a lot for every single, I think this is our 23rd Legendary Synth. So that means we've done this stream, like we've covered 23 since 1983. Doug Curtis and Sequential Circus introduced the CEM3394 synth-on-a-chip. And that's a VCO, VCF, and VCA on a single integrated circuit, a single chip. It's first aimed at arcade use via the 6-voice Model 206 card for the Senti arcade computer, the SAC-1, before the video game market crash forced a pivot. So it's like this weird story with Sequential in the mid-80s, early 80s, really, 83-ish, where they were trying to pivot towards video games, and then they pivoted towards computers. So they actually took the same 6-voice architecture, so basically 6 3394s, and they called it the Model 220 for the Apple II computer and the 230 for the PCs. Before the following year in 1984, realized they could use this same IC for a synthesizer, which is primarily what they made. And what's interesting about the CEM94 is it's everything on a chip except for an envelope generator and an LFO, and that's what we get here on the AX60. We have that on 2 and an LFO, and we actually have 2 because there's a separate one for the pulse width. So 1984, we have Akai forming Akai Professional, actually. So the same year the 6-track comes out, Akai puts out Akai Professional, which is designed to make musical instruments. And they launched with like a tape recorder, a drum machine, I think. And then they also put out the AX60. And Kazuo Morioka actually designed the AX60. The 80. So that's a DCO-based synth, but it has 2 DCOs per voice plus a sub-oscillator, which is very rare among DCO synths. I can only think of one other, the Akai SX240, that has that type of architecture. And I believe it was Morioka's last synthesizer, sadly. I'm not aware of him making any others. If you guys are familiar with him, let me know if there's anything that came later. So through 1985, the industry rushed towards digital synthesis, catching up with the DX7, which had come out 2 years earlier. And we start seeing a lot of hybrid synthesizers, actually, like the Korg DW8000. In early 86, Akai introduced the AX73, which is the same core sound engine as the AX60 without an arpeggiator, I believe, and has no panel control. So sometimes you'll see this big gray version of the synth. And the VX90 is the rack version of that. And then later in 86, Akai releases the AX60. And that's this bad boy. And what's so interesting about this too is this might actually be one of the last analog synths. I believe it was. I think the JX10 came out the same year, 1986 or maybe 87, but this has got to be one of the last analog synthesizer releases ever until the Renaissance period, what we're living through right now, which is pretty crazy to think about. So we've covered some of that. So the resonance is pretty extreme, and it does have the MN 3009 BBD, which is the same sound as what you'd get from a Juno 6. So a very powerful synth, but it does have some limitations, right? It doesn't have MIDI implementation as well as it should. Note on and off is no problem, but no sysx or anything like that, which at the time was behind. It doesn't have velocity, it doesn't have aftertouch, and it doesn't have portamento. So those are all things that you could find on synthesizers. You know, the Oberheim Expander came out 2 years before this. That has velocity, aftertouch, it has all of that stuff. DW8000, velocity, aftertouch. Alpha Juno, velocity, aftertouch. JX8P, velocity, aftertouch. You know, so we're falling behind. around the release window for this, we also get a bunch of other hybrid synths. So the ESQ1 comes out in 86. That's a badass synth by Ensoniq. I hope to get one at some point. Prophet VS, the most badass hybrid synth of all time. The DW8000's out. The DSS1, which we're going to be checking out soon again. And the Super JX came out in 86 as well. So we're really kind of in this neighborhood here. Around $500 for an AX73 is not bad. If you're okay with the not knobs, it's the same synth under the hood. So if you like the sound, that's pretty cool. Peter Forrest's book, A to Z of Analog Synths, I found some photocopies of it online that someone basically uploaded. And it suggested the AX60 was only sold in the US, which matches how frequently you'll see these in the US, but not elsewhere. So through the 80s, Akai Professional gains momentum, and they actually exit the industry in 1991. Akai does, and leaves Akai Professional to just focus on that, because in what would have been the late 80s, Roger Lynn comes out with the MPC for Akai, and that changes the game for them. That's another story for another night. There were some issues with the brand though, and 10 years later, they're very close to going out of business. And so in 2005, Jack O'Donnell acquires Akai Professional and folds it into InMusic, which you guys will know owns Moog now, but Alesis, Newmark, bunch of other brands like that. So that's where we're at today with the Akai brand. So if you go on the Akai website, there's not really any mention of this synth, because this comes from that previous era before then. So let's see, what are some facts that I haven't covered yet? I think I've covered, a fun fact I haven't covered is that Akai's analog synths none of them were major sellers back in the day, partly because like Kawai, they were trailing behind everybody else. So Kawai put out some incredible instruments, some incredible synthesizers, but it was like a year or two late. Same thing with like the Chroma Polaris, same thing with this, where it's like, this would have been blown people away in 83 or 82, but because it came out all the way in 86, it's like the world had moved on from this type of sound. So aside from the price, it's that's really all it was competing on, unfortunately. I don't think people were like today, us fans of darker industrial music can appreciate this insane resonance, right? But back in the day, this was just way too extreme for people to get. So let's go ahead and talk about the price. So the best price I could find for this was that in 1986, this launched for $925, which was pretty good. That's an adjusted for inflation price of $2,792, which is actually not that bad. Considering we have had some synths like the SY99 go close to $10,000 in inflation adjusted dollars. So, you know, this was always geared towards the budget end of the market, even though the Curtis chip inside of it, people like to knock it, but I think it sounds phenomenal. So what can you expect to pay for one of these bad boys nowadays on Reverb? So the way I compute the street price is I throw out anything that has a problem. So if there's, you know, every knob, fader, key has to work. And I don't mind some battle scars, right? I mean, mine's got some pretty good ones. It actually kind of makes it look sexier, I think. So I don't mind some patina, but I take the three lowest on the market and I average those prices. And the street price for this is $1,150, which is probably a little high compared to the last couple of years. So if you bought one of these a couple of years ago, this isn't a bad time to sell. And if you want to buy one of these, it's a little high right now. I still think $1,150 is great. And if you can get it for less than that, awesome. You know, local deals, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, things like that. What's interesting is that when you look at the devaluation, it's only come down 59% from its inflation adjusted cost to today, which actually makes it the third lowest depreciation legendary synth we've checked out, only falling behind the Monopoly and the Moog Source, which is interesting for me. Sale recently for $320. I mean, that's an incredible price. So the size in Poptarts of the synthesizer, it would take 39 Poptarts to cover this bad boy. It's pretty lightweight, which is nice. I like a synth that's about this weight and size because it's easy to move around still. You know, like when I go to move the CS70M, that's like a two-person job. And this is nice and tight. It doesn't have wood sides, so that reduces the footprint a bit. And it's very tall. It's like off my desk, probably 4 or 5 inches. It's which you can't really see just from the camera angle, but it's high, which is nice too. It makes it has a little grip on the edge here. It's a very, I mean, it's got a metal panel. Whether or not you like the look of it, we'll determine that in the Elvira test later. But it's definitely built like a tank. I really like the construction of this synthesizer. So let's talk about the pros and cons of this synthesizer. So the way I like to do pros and cons is a little different. I like to do 3 people I think the synth is for, and 3 people who I think should pass on this synth. So I'd be curious to know who out there, you know, which one of these 6 people are you? So the first person would be a fan of vintage voltage controlled oscillator tone on a relatively cheap budget, because if you want that true VCO character, you're not going to get from DCO synths like the Alpha Junos, the JXs. You can get this for cheaper than a Poly 6, cheaper usually than a Prophet 600 with Glee, and it's certainly cheaper than like a Chroma Polaris. So those are like the options outside of this bad boy. If you want to get a vintage analog synthesizer, this is probably the cheapest one you can get with VCOs. As far as polysynths go, I don't know if anybody can think of something else out there that, you know, might be in that neighborhood. If there's anything cheaper, of course, the 6-track will be cheaper, right? But it's not going to have the hands-on controls in the chorus. Same thing with like some of the other cheaper sequentials. You can get there, but it's not going to be quite the experience of this. So I would save up and get this instead, usually, because the 6 tracks tend to be about the same price anyways. So this is also a great synth for people who love hands-on control. Hopefully you guys saw how easy it's a delight to program. It really is. Tontec Mod adjusts the resonance, like basically the taper, and makes the faders more responsive. I don't think it's necessary. I always recommend buying a Prophet 600 with the Glee mod. Like, I wouldn't recommend buying one without it, because I don't think you can get it modified anymore. As far as the Tontec mod goes, I believe you also can't get that anymore. I messaged with Tontec himself, and he's not making them anymore. So if you do have one that's modified, I would recommend charging more for that, because I think the value of those are going to go up from here. But very tweakable. And you can get some synths that sound like maybe better, but they're not going to have the hands-on controls. You know, from the 80s, this was pretty rare, actually. The third person is obviously people who love the crazy Filter FM, because it's the most extreme. The resonance just goes way further than you'd think it would. Whereas even on the mighty Matrix 12, you know, when you push the resonance all the way, it's just getting into self-oscillation, right? Whereas here, we go way past it, way past it. So in my opinion, there's something about that that's worth it to some people out there. You have to be sort of into a synth that sounds different, I think. It can do the 80s Juno-y type sounds really well, as you've been able to hear, but I think you would hold on to the synth because you crave that Filter FM character. Here's who the synth's not for. Budget vintage analog synth hunters. Like, if you want to buy a great sounding vintage analogs polysynth and you want to spend the least amount of money possible, I think the JX8P is not quite half the price of this, but it's going to sound really great. It's going to have basically the same chorus, maybe even arguably better implementation of it. It's going to give you more or less everything you have here. It doesn't have pulse width modulation, so you're losing that, but I would prefer to have the 2 oscillators. I think that's going to be lusher. So in some ways, the JX8P is like, if you're just going to buy, you're a producer and you're like, I just want to own one vintage analog synth and I don't want to spend an arm and a leg. The Alpha Juno has a sub oscillator and a chorus, but it doesn't have the hands-on controls. The JX8P is not hard to program. The Alpha Juno is more of a bitch without something like a controller panel or something like that. Here's someone who I don't think it's for. I think if you're really, you know, not as concerned about the knobs, you're good with parameter access. I think you're actually better off with like a Matrix 6, because you can get these for almost the exact same amount of money right now as a Matrix 6. I think they're within $50 when I calculated the street price yesterday. And the Matrix 6 just sounds better than this. It's just the best sounding DCO synth from the 80s. So if all you care about is the sonic character and not so much about the interface, the experience of it, the Matrix 6 is the way to go. And then, like I said, there's really, the Prophet 600 is close to the price of this, but you have PWM and a second voltage controlled oscillator. So as far as like a plush pad sound, that's probably going to beat it out, even though it doesn't have chorus built in, you know? So that's what I think about that. What do you guys think? What category do you fit into? I need to have another sip, so can I get a scum cheers, you guys? That's exactly right, Dub. Who the synth is for? You like the sound of wailing tortured souls in a post-industrial apocalyptic hellscape. I couldn't have said it better myself. The Matrix 6 is a great synthesizer. The more I learn about the Matrix 6, the more I've realized it is the same synth as a Matrix 12, except for the DCOs and the multi-mode filter, which is a lot. But when you consider that you can get a Matrix 6 for like $1,100 or so, maybe 1,200, and Matrix 12s are like 20 grand. it's you know, it's you can get most of it with a Matrix 6. It has all of the same functions and things like that. It actually can even morph between a sawtooth and a triangle wave, which the Matrix 12 can't. Fun fact, maybe not everybody knew about that. So now I think it's time for the legendary test. So if you guys haven't been here before, let me explain it to you real quick. So this is a painstakingly devised series of 12 tests created with the help of you guys to see if a synthesizer has what it takes to be called legendary. Here's how it works. For a synthesizer to earn the title of legendary, it needs to score 12 points or more. If it scores 10 or 11, it's iconic. 8 or 9 points, that's classic. 6, 7, respectable. 4 or 5, the synth is just mid. Anything less, and we're diving into dubious or even impoverished territory where synths gather dust in the back of the studio. So how do we score? How does this work? I'll read each question aloud and then post a poll in the chat. Yes always means the synth passes the test, and no means it's out of tune with our expectations. We have 1 minute to vote on each question. I might as well get my timer out now. Here we go. We set a minute on the clock here. You, the chat, get half a point for each question, and I contribute the other half. So if you love or hate this synth, let your voice be heard. The last question counts for 2 full points. Let's see if the Akai AX60 can filter through the competition. Are you ready? Let's start the test with the John Hammond test. Did this synthesizer bring innovation to the industry or move synthesizer technology forward? 1 minute on the clock. Oh, I need to write that in the chat. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit more than 1 minute to think about it, because I was a bad dad and I did not drop it in the chat yet. Here we go. Now it's in the chat. So the John Hammond test. Did this synthesizer bring innovation to the industry or move synthesizer tech forward? 1 minute on the clock. Let's go. So the idea of this is interesting for this synth in particular, because in a way, this synth is an incredibly derivative synth, right? There's nothing about this synth that's completely new except for the sampler input. Because not only does this synth have the sampler input, but it's never been done before, right? Which is pretty incredible. So I think it might pass it, but I could understand failing it too, because it is for most people most of the time who don't have that cable and an S612, this is a derivative synthesizer. It's not a bad synth. It's just there's not a lot here that hasn't been done before. The chips were invented in 83 that went into this synth, right? 10 seconds left, so let's get it done. But I think for me, I think the sampler function, even though I didn't find it useful with my sampler, was good. So 60% of you guys said no. And I'm actually going to vote yes on this one. I think it does deserve that point, that half a point from me. Because of the sampler function, I do believe it deserves that. So next up, we have the training day test. Is the synths interface straightforward enough for a beginner to learn? 1 minute on the clock, and let's go right now. I think this is an easy... If you had to teach someone how synthesis works back in 1986, you could go a lot worse than this synth, for sure. I would love to get one, Robo-Ami. Sorry, I butchered that. I don't think it... That's a good point, 40 Thieves. Did it push the culture forward, though? Probably not. That's kind of like the David Lynchy... You know, it's funny, a lot of these tests have like crossover between them, and I think we'll score that one interestingly. Oh, interesting. 100% of people say yes right now. So if you're a dissenter, you should definitely get your vote in. 2 envelopes under one set of controls. Yes, that's right, Infundibula. That's maybe the one thing you could knock it for. But we've got 5 seconds left. I think we know how this one's going to go. Time's up. And 100% of people said yes, it deserves the point, and I agree. I certainly agree. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, this one's going to be interesting. This is a new test. So if you're not a member of the channel, this will be unfamiliar to you because we have recently updated the Legendary Synth test. So this is the Dale Cooper test. Does this synth sound or features take you to places both wonderful and strange? Does it have the power to surprise you through unique timbres, odd behaviors, or a novel combination of features that take it beyond predictable subtractive territory? 1 minute on the clock. Let's go. So the Dale Cooper test is all about us being able to determine, you know, does this synth have interesting... It can sometimes be sound and it can sometimes be features, but one of those things that kind of surprises you. And I know for me, this synth is like the definition of the Dale Cooper test, where I didn't really understand. I mean, this is a synth that made me fall in love with Filter FM, which is now my favorite feature a synth can have. And it's because it's unpredictable and weird. And I hope that you guys have heard this have sounds that are different and striking and unique. I would say strange and wonderful. For some people, it's just like nails on a chalkboard, ice pick ear resonance. You know, for me, it's not even counting 40 Thieves, the sampler input. So that was the minute, and 86% of you guys said yes, and I too am going to give it the point. Now we are moving on to the second new test in the Legendary Synth test. So we lost the Roy Batty and the Daniel Day-Lewis test. I'll explain that later. The Cypher test. Are there no cheaper hardware or software clones of this synth that sound as juicy and delicious? Many synths have clones, but few have perfect recreations. 1 minute on the clock. Let's go. So I should mention Martinique AX73. I think Zakarmic mentioned it earlier in the stream. $104, and it is a VST recreation of the AX60. I think it's good. I do not think it gets over the hurdle of sounding as good or better than this synth. There's a few VST manufacturers who make very, very, very good synth sounds. Let me make sure I've got my... Yep, we're going fine. Should be good. Is everybody getting the stream still? So let's see here. There it goes. It's back. Yeah, it can be confusing. So it should fail the test if there's a cheaper clone of this synth that you could get that sounds as good. It should pass the test if there's no cheaper clone that sounds as good as this. And in my opinion, that was the minute there. 52% of you guys said no. And I'm going to say yes. So, are there no cheaper hardware or software clones of the synth that sound juicy and delicious? I guess it's the negative there. Remember, yes always means the synth passed the test, and it should get the point, right? If it should get the point if there's no cheaper alternative, right? But 52% of you guys said no. So, in the interest of fairness here, that means I'm going to contribute a yes, and you guys contribute half a point for no. This next one's really interesting because I do not know how I'm going to vote on it at all. Sometimes we get to those questions and I have to take a while to think about it, more than a minute. The aliens from Signs test. Does the synthesizer avoid any major design flaws or missing key features? 1 minute on the clock. Let's go. This is the Achilles heel test. Is there anything the synth is missing? Well, it's missing portamento. I don't know if that really matters. The SysX is an issue. Velocity aftertouch isn't exactly a missing feature because, you know, synths like the Poly 6 and the Juno 6 don't have velocity and aftertouch. Jupiter 4, Jupiter 8. But I think for some people, that might be a few of these things add up to not feeling all the way there. Yeah, in Infundibula, I do think it's kind of confusingly written. I just don't know how to say it differently where the yes won't mean that it doesn't pass the test. Is that it's easy to nitpick. For me, a synth like this to pass, there's synths that don't do everything. Like the Poly 800 is an example of that. I think we did fail it, but I don't think it needs to do more. That was the minute on the test, and 72% of you guys said yes. 68% actually said yes. I need to kind of talk this out in front of you guys to decide. I think it passes the test narrowly. If it had another VCO, if this was a 2 VCO synth, it would be fucking murderous. It would be one of the great. Is this synth unequaled by a soft synth or something to that extent? That's a better way of saying that. I'm actually going to change it in Infundibula. That sounds better for the next stream. So for me, yeah, I don't think it's missing anything. It's just not giving as much as some of the other synths in this territory. You know, that's how I would describe this one. But with that in mind, we're going to actually pass it because I think that's right. Oh, here's another really interesting one. The Elvira test. Do you think, does the synthesizer rank among the most beautiful or iconic in terms of aesthetics? Everybody knows the most important part of how a synthesizer sounds is how it looks. So I'm going to drop that in the chat right now. Dude, if it was dual VCO, it'd be fucking killer. There's no joke. Can I get a scum cheers? Thank you very much, Brett. This one's really interesting. I love the look of this synth, but I could see people really hating it because it is such a, I mean, it's, my thing is like, I'm not going to pass any black or gray boxes. I love the look of the JX10, but I'm not going to pass it because then I'm passing basically everything. This synth, I do think is an iconic synth. You know what though? I'm kind of going back and forth on it. Honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going back and forth. This might be the borderline case where it's like, yeah, it's got enough, but it's kind of like, again, I like this sort of gold thing. It's if you are MIDI, I would recommend reloading your browser because otherwise you're going to be voting on the wrong thing. Is it among the most beautiful or iconic? Oh, if I go by the wording of the test, the answer for me is no. It's gorgeous to me, but is it among the most beautiful or iconic? No. I really like the gold, but it's a lot of gray buttons and faders. I like the look, but it probably is like kind of an ugly cream, but like this military gray. It's probably, so 59% of you guys said no, and I think I'm going to no too, sadly. The DX7's not passing this test, not on my watch. So that's going to be 0. We're moving on to the Starscream test. One of the relatively new tests. Does the synth transform into multiple roles, bass, leads, pads, and textures without losing focus? So what this means is, that's a minute on the clock right now. Can the synth do bass? Can it do leads? And can it do pads? And, you know, certain romplers out there, like a JV1080 maybe, it can do a lot, but it's not going to do anything great. So with this synth, I think it's okay to say, for me, this is a pass. This synth can do bass great. It can do leads. It can do pads. It can basically cover all of the range you want from an analog synth. I think when you compare it to others, sometimes it won't compare so well because it doesn't have that VCO, that extra VCO. It doesn't have a sub oscillator. The resonance goes crazy pretty quick. But I think what it can be said is it's a pretty versatile synthesizer. You know, it's definitely, for me, it's in the conversation for most versatile analog synths. The more I think about it, yeah, it's for me, bass is fine, but it's gonna do those filter FM pads and leads better. 82% of you guys said yes, and I too am going to say yes. So that's a point for the Starscream test. You could see that we're coming up to the Nostromo test. So let me drop this in the chat right now. And I think this one's going to be pretty clear too. The Nostromo test. Can you program the synth easily without excessive menu diving or a program or editor? 1 minute on the clock. I mean, there's virtually no point of having a editor, except for the fact that I didn't even mention this. We have upper and lower splits on this. So I guess you could split, and you can change the different voices. So you guys probably can see this on stream. You could have all 6 upper. You could have 2 lower, 4 upper, 4 lower, 2 upper, or all 6 lower. So maybe an editor would be helpful for that. It doesn't have sysx, so it's kind of a moot point. But more than anything, it's the definition of like pretty damn much a 1 knob per function. Not quite as much as a Poly 6, but it has 2 envelopes, which a Poly 6 doesn't have, right? Juno 6 doesn't have any menu diving, but it's only got 1 envelope. So considering, I would rather have a synth where you have to swap over here, but you get that second envelope any day, for me personally. So that is 1 minute up right there. 90% of you guys said yes, which feels correct to me. So let's go ahead and Nostromo test. It gets the point. Ooh, this one is going to be tough. The Deep Space Nine test. I do not know what I think about this one. This one's going to be interesting. Deep Space Nine test. Does this synthesizer have deep modulation possibilities that keep sound designers excited? So here's my thinking on this one, and this is an evolution of where we're at with the test now as compared to where we were a year ago, where we had different parameters. So the Dale Cooper test, I think, covers the unique, surprising, strange, and wonderful sounds you can get from the resonance and filter FM. As far as modulation goes, we've got one LFO, we've got 2 LFOs, right? And that's about it. We have an arpeggiator. I think for me, this is going to be a fail. I forgot to press the start poll, so I'm going to start this over. I apologize, you guys. 1 minute on the clock right now. I think for me, this is going to be a fail because of the way, yeah, it shines through unpredictability, but not the design. That's said very well. It's not. You're always editing the wrong one. That's funny. For me, it should pass the Dale Cooper test, and that's the difference here. Some synths pass the Dale Cooper test simply because the modulation is deep enough that it's surprising, right? Something like a Waldorf Blofeld might pass for that reason. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't realize I could modulate it, you know, with like 3 envelopes or something like that. You could deeply modulate the filter. But deep, yeah, I agree. As far as the subtractive stuff, it really does follow kind of your typical, you know, Juno style architecture. And it's not giving us a lot aside from that. So let's see what you guys said. 75% said no. That feels correct. So I'm going to give it a no as well. So we're coming up already to the end of the test. We've only got a few questions left. The Han Solo test. Has this synthesizer aged like a fine wine? Interesting. It's a really interesting one. Because people don't like this synth. Like I said, a lot of people don't like it. I think objectively the answer is no, because, you know, it's people don't covet it as much as the other ones. For me, and I think for many of the scum here in the chat, yo, can I get a scum cheers in the chat while you guys are deciding? Absolutely. This is like the definition of what I'm looking for from a scum synthesizer, is a synth that's cheaper, undervalued by other people, and is super cool and unique and can do things that no other synthesizer can. That's the magic of vintage synthesizers, is that, you know, nowadays synths are so standardized, they're so vanilla, they're so boring sonically. This is not a boring sonically synth. So for me, it's a yes, but I understand completely if it's a no. I'm going to let you guys finish voting. I'm going to give you guys 10 more seconds before I look. And by 10 seconds, I mean like 15, just to let you guys, like, I've said both sides of the argument and I don't want to sway you guys. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 57%, 59% very narrowly said yes. So it's getting the point. And guess what? It's getting the point from me too. This synth is doing pretty good. But you know what? This test feels really good for this synth, because we have sort of those distinctions between Dale Cooper and Deep Space Nine. And then we have like a distinction here between the Han Solo test and the David Lynch test. So the David Lynch test has the synthesizer, does it have a distinct character that's left a lasting mark on the world? 1 minute on the clock. Does it have a distinct character? Yes. Did it leave a mark on the world? Probably not, right? So I don't know how to answer this one, because it's a yes to the first half and a no to the second one. You know, does it have a distinct enough character? I think so. It does not feel like it left a mark on the world, though. It's got to be one of the only synths on Vintage Synth that it's like, I think it says it might have been used by Bjork, right? How crazy is that? Basically every synth was used by like Depeche Mode or Vangelis and a bunch of those other artists at some point, you know? For this one, I think for me, it gets the point for Han Solo. It's aged like a fine wine, in my opinion, for me, the type of synthesist that I am. But did it leave a mark on the world? I think that's enough of a criteria that this did not hit. That so for me, it's going to be a no. And it looks like it's a no from you guys too. 78% of you guys voted no on this one. So it's not getting the point from either of us. Now we get to the most important test of all, and this is going to be interesting. I really want you guys to vote with your heart on this one. If you don't love the sound of this synth, don't vote yes, right? It's okay to not love the sound of this synth. I know a lot of you guys don't, and I think you guys know that I do. The Vangelis test. Do the raw oscillators and filters of this synthesizer have that magic quality? This is for 2 points, guys. So I do want you to think about it and really give it the right answer for you. You've got a minute on the clock. For me, yes. Although it's kind of borderline because the resonance loses a lot of bass, whereas I like the more Oberheim-y sound where you keep more of the bass as you crank the resonance. That's okay too for me anyways. for whatever reason, this resonance sort of feels like the Roland SH2 or a couple of the other synths that I do like that lose it. Something about this sound palette just works with that in a way that I don't like it on other synths. So it's hard to say. It's pushed. You know, I generally like a synth that's pretty pushed, and I think that this has that. 10 seconds left, guys, so please get your vote in if you want to have your voice heard. I think it's important this one that you vote truly from your heart, because it's okay to not like this one. I'm voting yes, though, and 78% of you guys said yes. Interesting. Might finally graduate if I ace this test. The oscillators are very good adapt, for sure. Dub's like the 3394 is not and has never been Magic. I understand that. It probably is the worst of the Curtis chips. I would just argue that that's not that bad. You know, I like the sound of the synth. I think if it didn't have filter FM and the resonance wasn't crazy, though, I will say this: if you're not into that, it might fail the test for me. I might be like, oh, it's just a very basic, like, cheap profit knockoff type sound, you know. It sounds like Send Me an Angel and that's a good thing. Hey, there's nothing wrong with, I really wanted people to vote with their hearts on this one, because I think that does matter. So let's see here. Let's look at what we have here. It gets the 2 points. So 0.5, 1.5, 2.5, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points. So the final score is 9 out of 12, which is very good. 9 out of 13. Let me just double check that. 2.5, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's right. So 9 points. Let's go look and see where that puts us at. That puts us into classic. So I was suspecting it might end up here, but it might not have. So let's go ahead and jump in here and add this information in. So it's a classic synthesizer. And let's fix that and bring this back in. And it had 9 points. Let's see, get that where it needs to be. Boom. So now we can take $1,150 and divide it by 9 points. And so that's $128 price per point. And this is, to me, the most important metric we have, right? Because $128, let's see how that ranks. Because that's the way I look at it, is within a category. So this scored classic, right? Any of those synths you see there are really good synths. And the best are actually the ones that you can get with the lowest price per point, right? So 128 is not great. In fact, it's only going to go up a little bit above the Prophet 600, and it's just slightly cheaper than the Prophet 600. So that doesn't feel wrong, in my opinion. Feels about right. We do have a lot that we need to talk about here that's different. Oh wait, let me just get that here figured out. That's the problem. Boom, that should look right now. Yeah. The AX60 scored better than the Nord lead too. That's it. I quit. Yeah. Battle of the Synths year-end review. I do want to, something I want to do, Prophet 600 greater than the AX60. It is and it isn't for me. It is absolutely, and it isn't for me, is how I would say it. Like on some level, yes, it is. But what I like to think is when you look at these prices here, it's really like the difference here is it got 1 extra point, but it's also cheaper. That's just how it got ahead of the Prophet 600. But what I want to do later on, you guys, is do sort of like a take it to court. Like which points do you guys think are the most wrong, right? And then we'll do like kind of a bonus stream for the members of this channel where we maybe relitigate 1 or 2 of these. So I want to go over some of the stuff that's changed, actually. So I'm going to just pull up some notes here because I jotted them down. So if you've been watching these Legendary streams, you'll know that the street prices have actually changed. I went through and redid the street prices for every single synthesizer from last year. So we started in October last year, and I've redone them. So some of the movement you'll see on this is just from the prices change. Some of the synths have gone up, some of them have gone down. Yeah, Synthsonic loves the the M1. So with that, there's new devaluation and price per point updates for every single synth on the list. So if you've been watching for a bit and you look at it, you go, wait a second, that seems wrong. It's because some of the synths might have moved up or down. In general, the new tests have hurt most of the synths because it was easier to pass the Roy Batty, which was like, was the synth constructed well? And Daniel Day-Lewis is the synth expressive tests compared to the new ones. Michael Heller, that's one hell of a lineup. I'd love to know what you prefer of the three of them. Like if you had to keep only one, which would it be? And then if you could keep two, which two would it be? Let me know, Michael. The Monopoly barely clung on to being our only legendary synth. It actually lost half a point, but it's still there, which is nice. Sadly, for me personally, very sadly, the Wave Station lost its iconic status due to the cipher test, right? So it lost a point because the Wave Station VST is so good. To me, the cipher test, like the Wave Station's the best example of a synthesizer that that should fail the cipher test, because I actually use the VST more than I use the hardware, just because it's so fucking convenient and so good. It's got all of the sounds they ever made for it. Well, most of them anyways. Not all of the Wave Station EX sounds for some reason. So I have sampled some stuff off the hardware that's not in the software, but it's fucking good. Despite losing half a point, the JX10 pulled ahead of the 3P you'll see. And that's because its price has dropped. So I think it was like $1,1200 last year. MIDI Alchemy, take care. And this year you could get it for like $800. You'll see that street price is pretty great. And so like I said earlier in the stream, if you're interested in buying a JX10, now's the time to do it. So just because of its price per point changed because of the street price, it pulled ahead of the JX3P. You'll notice what's no longer a classic synth is the Moog Source. So it was stripped of its classic status and now resides at the bottom of the respectable section, which is a pretty big jump. Even though it has a half a point more than the rest of the respectable synths. It failed the cipher test as it's pretty much a mini Moog under the hood, and that's a well-emulated synth in hardware and VST form. And its simple architecture failed the Dale Cooper test. It'll pretty much always be at the bottom of whatever section it's in, by the way, because it just has such a high price per point, because it's a Moog synth. That's because this is really not an indictment of the synth. It's more just that Moog synths, and to a certain extent sequential synths and ARP synths, command a really high price tag for what they are. There's a bunch of them right now in Fundebula. The Corgam 1 also got knocked into mid because of things like the cipher test, and it's relatively but not everybody agreed with that. Synthsonic EX5 is the only synth that seemed to benefit from the new test, and it jumped up out of mid into respectable, because when you think about it, it's like no other synths really emulate what the EX5 is doing, so it got that point because of all the different synthesis types it has in it, and it got the Dale Cooper because of that, because you really can create some sounds with that synth that aren't really there. We should do a stream where we do vintage synth questions. Elaborate on that. I would love to do it. Sounds great, but I'm not sure I know exactly what you mean. Escape Limitations, is the Prophet 12 really the best, Dave? Derek, I'm gonna summarize the path that happens with most synthesizers on this channel. You could describe it as I stubbornly cling on to my bias, and Dub Station Zero says the truth, and then I just hold on, kicking and screaming. No, I don't want to let go of my bias. The Prophet 12 sounds like a JP8000. It sounds like a virus. And then eventually the truth is staring me in the face long enough that I have to admit, in our last stream on it, I think he said it pretty well. It's like, you could not have made those sounds without the synth. And it's like the tune feedback and everything. Yeah, it's probably the best. I think the Prophet VS is still my white whale. I really want a Prophet VS. Maybe it won't be everything I dream it to be. I just think it sounds like the most intense 80s hybrid synth there is. Like, just talk about aggression. And then the contestant would be the Poly Evolver, because it's got the Prophet VS waves, but it's also got analog oscillators, and might be a better fit for me. But the Prophet 12, I think, I don't know what you guys think about this, but I think I would recommend that synth ahead of everything Sequential's doing right now. Yeah. Q&A. I would love to do it, Aquatic. I'm kind of like fascinated, or I think it's good when I have a format for these streams, because I did do a Q&A, I want to say like an AMA type thing around 2,000 or 5,000 subscribers, and it's got to be one of my worst performing videos. So, which isn't everything. I don't really care about statistics. It's more like I use that as a way to be like, hey, did I make a piece of content people are actually interested in? So I might have to ruminate on that a bit, Aquatic, and come up with like a good format that would work. Maybe I could create some sort of form where people could ask questions ahead of time or something. That might be the way to do it, something like that. So what else? Nordlead 2 was correctly knocked out of the respectable category and into mid. Very happy about that. And finally, while still being the lowest scoring and only impoverished synth on the list, the HT6000 passed the cipher test, finally gaining its first real point and lowering its price per point from $2,000 to a mere $425 per point, retaining its title as the most expensive price per point synth on the list. So you have to pay its entire street price to get one legendary synth point on that synthesizer, but I'm happy it's got something, because it previously had only a quarter of a point, which was pretty fucking brutal. So jumping back to analyze here what I think about, I just want to kind of look at what we have. So obviously the Monopoly's up there. Really fascinating that the vintage digital workhorses, I think around 91, are the only synths we have in that iconic status. I think it's really hard for a vintage digital synth to get above iconic, just because we're a bunch of snobs here. And they tend to all have at least some drawback. The JD800, I think, could be a legendary synth, but it doesn't have PWM, right? So will it get docked for that in the test? We'll have to see. JD800 plus a PG1000, same thing. It's like, is it a legendary synth? Well, maybe. Moving down, and we have a bunch of analog synths, a hybrid, and a sampler. So the Mirage is looking like it's always going to be one of the best ever in terms of price per point. Robert M says, just a thought, Vulture Culture, maybe you should do a stream on the entire Dave Smith synth chronology. Probably would be 2 hours. I mean, I'd love to. I just don't. Do people Piano Synthaholics only had a Poly Evolver for a week, but I haven't touched anything else. No, that sucks, Sari. But also, good thing that you're dedicated to your family. I appreciate a good person. As far as doing a stream on the all the Dave Smith stuff, I'd love to do that. I'd love to do it. I just don't know, because I only own one, right? Yeah, I sold the Prophet 600. I think if I still had the 600, the 12, and I bought another one, maybe a modern one, or I was able to borrow one or something, I could do it. I would just want to do it justice, and I don't know how I would. other than just talking at the camera. I think, you know, you need a mixture of hearing the synth and also, I mean, I think a lot of people can't stand how much I talk. They just want me to play the synth more. But hopefully you guys appreciate it. Can I get some scum cheers if you appreciate what's going on? Let's see here. Yeah, Alex Ball's really the king of doing that sort of thing. He actually did one on that. And I read this book. If you're interested in it, here, I'm going to show it to you real quick. I'm going to jump back to the stream here, and I'm going to just get rid of this real quick. So The Prophet from Silicon Valley, The Complete Story of Sequential Circuits by David Abernethy. Definitely the best book I've read on vintage synthesizers. And it's so in-depth. And I actually got a lot of my info about the Curtis 3394 chip from this. So I actually was turned to, like, for instance, here's one of my favorite parts right here. Talking about the 6-track, Stanley Jungleb says, we put out an ad. It said something like acoustic bass on one voice, electric piano on voice 2. Maybe you've seen the ad. It was like all 6 things. You can see here, it's actually the ads down here. It's like brass on track 1, guitar on track 2, bass on track 3, violin on track 4, sax on track 5, electric piano on track 6. And then we release the instrument and there's no saxophone patch in it because you just can't be done. Somebody writes in and says, I'm going to sue your asses because you can't even make a saxophone on your instrument. And I think that's hilarious. And it's full of little anecdotes like that. So I don't know that I can provide. I don't know how I would go about doing something like that, but I'm open. I don't mean to sound negative. I actually really appreciate all the ideas you guys are giving me tonight, and it's going to give me something to think about and try to get there. As far as like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do a stream just on all the Dave Smith synth? And I would love to do some sort of Q&A. I just want to figure out a way to do it where people would be interested in it, you know, because I'm always trying to add values to people's lives. So real quick, looking at this, there's like the sub $100 range when we look at the price per point. The 3P, the 10, the Wave Station, the JX8P, the K3, those are still all synths I highly recommend if you wanted to buy one vintage synthesizer. You know, sub $100 price per legendary synth point is a very good thing. K2000's like that. But the SY99, the Akai AX60, and the Prophet 600 are all sub $200 a point, and I think they're all better than everything in this range. Everybody knows my gripes about the Prophet 600, so I won't rehash them here. The respectable zone is an awesome place to be too. In fact, I miss my K1, I miss my Poly 800, and I miss my MS2000. I can't really justify owning them just because this synth museum has gotten so insane. It's like, what am I going to do? Sell one of the fucking really rare, expensive ones to hold on to a Poly 800? Probably not, but that doesn't mean I don't think it's great. So those sub 100 respectable synths, I know they're not quite as shiny as maybe the JXs, the Wave Station, the K3, the Mirage, but still sub 100 is a really great place to be. I'm starting to see that as sort of a breaking point. In the respectable range, EX5, K5000, and the Moog Source, the above 200 price point, I wouldn't recommend those. So that's where I'm at with the respectable synths. I think if you can get a respectable synth for sub $100 price per legendary synth point, that's really great. EX5, K5000S, Moog Source are never the first synths I'm going to go with there. Start with the HT. The mid synths, I've said it before. Korg M1, probably used on more tracks I love than any synthesizer. Nord Lead 2, you know, there's so many incredible synths that I just adore. I'm sorry, songs that I adore in the harsh electro genre, the agrotech genre that use the Nord Lead 2. So it's not to say that you can't make incredible, inspiring music. And if you find a synth like that inspiring, that's awesome. Same thing with the JP8000. I mean, incredible tracks. But when you just have the synth in front of you, I myself don't find it as inspiring. And then, of course, the U20 and the HT6000 should probably not be purchased. Yeah. And to K Pasamin's, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, point, the JP8000 is really the only synth that failed the Roy Batty test, which is why we pulled it out. So I said I'd mentioned that before. The Roy Batty test was, was the synth made to last? And of all of the synths that we've checked out, the JP8000 is the only one I've had that's been not repairable and had really annoying, like, jumpy faders and pots and everything. It just felt cheaply made. And the reason we pulled it out is it's like a lot of these synths have been around for 40, 45 years. They were built to last, right? They were all passing it. And, so yeah. Aquatic says, I want to get a great vintage synth to avoid buying a Domino next year. I don't know if I'm saying that right. An Astrolab, really? That's fascinating. But yes, I think, the thing is, if you, Aquatic, if you were going to buy a vintage synth and you don't want to spend too much money on it, that's where the price per point becomes really valuable. And that's where, looking at price per point here, honestly, these are all sub $200 and you're getting a lot of points. So it's not bad. If we just look at the points values, I guess the K3 actually scored the best of the classics. But, this is all... The reason I like bunching them into the categories and then ranking them by price per point is if we had a different 50 people voting on Insonic Mirage Day or on JX8P Day, we might have gotten a different outcome. So it's not too much, of a thing. Parbs, how are you doing, my friend? Yeah, a lot of people have mentioned this 2500. I think I was swayed by Angel Spit to not go 2500 route because he's really into the vintage digital character, which I tend to be too. I mean, I've actually thought the SY99 might not have been for me, and that I would prefer the SY77 just because it's a little grittier. We got to revisit the MS2000 score. So for you, is the MS2000 too high or too low in Findebula? Playbook show me. I appreciate that. I haven't looked at his tier list, but I'm looking forward to it. We did that. When did we do that? Did we do that last year? I don't think it was that long ago. We did a tier list of all of the synths I had. That was a fun stream. It was fun to get out of our usual. I'm really trying to stick to the format, but I've got a deadline on a new video, a sponsored video coming out hopefully next week if I can make it happen. And so that's going to make it hard for me to prepare. A lot of prep goes into a legendary stream. A lot of prep goes into the actually making music with streams. Like, is this the best synth for EBM or whatever genre we're looking at? So I might have to push back some of what we have and go with something that I can feasibly pull off next week. Astrolab. Oh, it's only 700. It's not bad. Oh my God, Keith. No, I didn't know Weaver Beats had a reaction to seeing me. What video was that? That sounds hilarious, potentially. The DW8000 will be on this list. There is a rhyme or a reason to the order of these synths, but I'm keeping it. I do a good job of kind of a balance of different synthesizers and samplers that go onto this list. Robert M, no, it hasn't. It will be, though. I have it just off camera. That one I'm waiting until I'm able to finish the tutorial I've been talking about for forever. That's like, unfortunately, it's a project that's been pushed back to like priority 3 constantly, which means it's going to rot on my hard drive for a bit. It just is the case that there's a few things that are a little more important than that. And also, I promised myself this year I would make art on this channel. Like I would actually focus on something like making either an album or something like that. And I failed to do it this year. It's been a great year. I've been able to work on some upcoming hardware synths, a lot of cool stuff with GeForce software, worked with some, it's been an amazing year and I'm very happy for how everything's gone. But I've let myself down a little bit in the sense that I haven't been able to complete a project that's not me doing it for YouTube, you know? So I promised myself I'm going to do that as soon as I can within reason. I love a sponsored video because it's expensive to do this. Oh my God. He goes, does he iron his beard? The answer is yes. I don't use a flat iron. DSS1's going to be really cool. Piano Synthaholic called it. Well, I think you guys can read my mind. There's no point. The SY99 is pretty amazing. I'm just saying for me, I might even like the 77 better. So I'll say this, like the biggest problem for me with the AX60 is that I own a Matrix 12 and a Matrix 6 and an Alesis Andromeda. And like, if I want to get that harsh filter FM sound, I think I have 3 or 4 other synths that can do it pretty much the same way. So it's an incredible synthesizer. And I think for most people, it's a great addition because they're not going to have a synth that can do filter FM quite like this one can. It just happens to be that ever since I've discovered the synth and really dug into it, I've now been seeking out every other synth that can do this type of thing. And when you have multiple VCOs and things like that, it does help it. So this is a synth that's no longer getting used as much as I'd like it to. And I do need to thin the herd when it comes to the vintage analogs. You know, I've just got too many of them. And there's other cool things. Oh, the CS70M, baby. It's the greatest of all time. I mean, of course, probably the CS80 would be up there, but as far as, I mean, I'm probably most proud of that. I think the CS70M is sort of like my signature at this point. I think people know that that's what it is. And when I get paid for, someone sends me MIDI tracks and I'm going to run them through my synths for an album or something like that, it's going to be the 70M because it just sounds so great. Yeah. TG33 is actually the best. Yeah, and then there's also, there's a really great controller panel for the SY33, so I'd like to try that out, but TG33 is definitely a scum one for sure. Prophet 12 is very good. Mine might be up for sale. You know, if I get a poly evolver, that would be the stream. I don't think I would keep both, but I didn't think I was going to keep the Juno 6, a poly 6 and an alpha Juno, but it was distinct enough to sort of, you know, that I really don't think I could sell the Juno 6, which sucks. I really wanted to sell it, you know. That's exactly it, 40 Thieves. It's like, I'm spoiled, right? And when you do have a CS70M and a Matrix 12, it's hard to go like, you're never gonna go for the AX60 because, you know, I guess there's probably a little bit with the different pulse width that you can do on it, but I'd rather do that with an Alpha Juno, which too only has one oscillator, but it's PWM on the sawtooth is way better. Can't do filter FM. So it's just unfortunately a little bit in there. Oh, Protein, you asked me about that earlier. I'm very excited about Protein. I haven't had a chance to watch Blush Response's video yet. But he did, I think, 40 of the patches. And I mean, just brilliant. I mean, really going to be a contender. I'm very happy that Waldorf is putting out a synth that doesn't cost $6,000. Your repair shop stole your poly evolver? Holy shit, that's fucked. Which repair shop is it? Let's never go there. Tell me the name. Yeah, Yeah, the Juno 6 pisses me off because it's so simple, but it's also just so damn charismatic. If it sounds awesome, it's gonna be a contender for synth of the year. I forgot what the price is, but it sounds like, am I wrong in saying that it was like $300 or something? Like if it's like $300 in Toronto, I want the name, because we've got a lot of Canadians that watch the stream, and it's important that people don't get taken advantage of. I'm sorry it happened to you, but let's not let other people, you know, you guys know, I try to be, look, I try to be polite, because with synths, like, it's somebody's baby who worked on these things or something. Okay. I was gonna say. The Quantum, okay. Let me just say this. I know about a synth that's coming out that will make people not want to buy a Quantum, and it's very good. It's just, I'm probably not allowed to say that. It's probably just broke an NDA there, but oh, that's funny. Keith, oh, right, because Keith, you're like the wavetable guy. That's funny. I didn't think about that. That could be something they add, but not if they don't have RAM in there. I want the protein like I'm orange with a comb over. That's good. But Piano Synthaholic, even if it was just repackaged Quantum sounds, it would be at a price point where people could actually afford it. That's my biggest gripe with the Quantum. Like, if I wasn't down the vintage synth path, the Quantum Mark II might be that, like, final girl energy synth for me. But when I did the last best synth of the year video, I think that was when I realized, like, Jesus Christ, this thing's overpriced. When a Novation Summit is essentially, you know, in the ballpark of the same thing. Keith is definitely the wavetable guy. By the way, Keith, you have any familiarity with the Waldorf XTK and getting, because you can load wavetables into that. I would love to load some of your best wavetables into that thing as well. So that would be cool. There's definitely synth-formants, and I'm just saying it because we're at the end of the stream and most of the synth-formants have already tuned off. So y'all know that at the end is when I have a tendency to speak a little bit more bluntly, because my thing is like, okay, you're real scum. Can I get a scum cheers in the chat if you've made it all the way to the end here? And I don't want to be cruel with my words, and especially I know sometimes I can be a little bit harsh with how I talk. So, and I'm aware of the fact that, like, whoever worked on the Quantum, it was absolutely a passion project, but it doesn't mean that they nailed it. Maybe they did. I don't know. We'd have to say. I can't wait to watch that Weaver Beats video. Anyways, guys, I'm gonna bail out of this motherfucker. Continue to be excellent, and I will see you guys all next week. Thank you so much. I'll see you there.